Hello, everyone. I'm Marcel Vanderweer, editor of OHS Canada. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Today's webinar, Best Practices in Contractor Qualification and Management, will discuss tips to uncover hidden risks, the return on investment of a streamlined system, key requirements for success, and how to make the case to upper management. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the GoToWebinar interface and we'll ask it at the end of the presentation. The session will also be sent to all registrants and will be available at ohscanada.com in the coming days. So if you'd like to watch it again or share it with a colleague, you will have that opportunity. With that, I'd like to introduce our three Avetta panelists. We're pleased to have Nicole Brackett, Regional Manager for Canada, Dennis Robinson, Sales Development Growth Manager, and Stephanie Watt, Market Development Executive for Canada. Over to you, Stephanie.
Awesome. Thanks, Marcel. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. I can see that we have an awesome variety of attendees online, and we really appreciate you guys spending the next hour with us. So before my colleague Nicole kicks things off, I wanted to start today with just a quick safety moment. So wanted to touch on business continuity planning. I'm sure it's no surprise to all of you that this is a prevalent topic right now, considering today's landscape. So I won't talk to these specific stages of success, but instead just wanted to highlight some of the ways that we've been helping our clients with redundancy planning and really shifting how they're currently engaging with their critical vendors. It's likely that if you didn't have much of a business continuity plan before COVID-19, I'd be willing to guess that you do now, or are in the process of building one out as the pandemic continues. We have a ton of great free resources at avetta.com that can help you fine-tune your needs as you work through contingency planning. So take a look, or of course, you can feel free to contact me directly after today's presentation as well.
Thanks, Stephanie. Now we'll get started. For those of you who don't know us, Avetta is a cloud-based platform which offers a configurable software as a service-based solution that assists organizations, both large and small, in managing supply chain risk across a variety of disciplines. Backed by first-in-class service and support, an Avetta partnership allows you to vet, maintain, benchmark, rationalize, and expand your supplier list with ease and confidence. We are the largest provider of contractor risk management solutions with over 95,000 active suppliers in our network and nearly 500 clients. As you can see from the map there, we have offices in Orem, Utah. That's our global location. Stephanie is speaking to you from our Canadian office in Calgary, and I'm speaking to you today from Montreal. In today's webinar, we will be discussing the critical nature of contractor pre-qualification, provide you with some key elements of an effective contractor management program, and dive into two studies conducted by the Campbell Institute, which illustrate the best practices for contractor pre-qualification. Nowadays, consumers have access to 24-hour news where accidents and incidents get publicized quickly. As more and more organizations increase their contractor outsourcing, so too does the risk increase. We would hate to see any one of you listed in the news, and protecting your reputation is an element of risk mitigation that's important to all of us. But there are some key benefits to outsourcing. Benefits like lowering your operational cost, allowing your organization to focus on your core business, deciding what expertise you need and outsourcing to those niche areas, freeing up internal resources, cost savings, and an increased efficiency in your own production. But there are potential downsides as well. You could have unqualified, unsafe, or financially unstable contractors. It's a lot harder to control the staff and who comes on site. In case of an event, you could have a lost life, downtime, reputational damage, or lost revenue. So why does risk follow? Well, multiple stakeholders with multiple different views gives insight from various perspectives. There's also a lack of visibility and collaboration, kind of the silo effect that many organizations are faced with today. Additionally, the accountability for safety, sustainability, and quality results fall on only a few shoulders. It's always someone else's job. So we must focus on our highest exposure and find tools to mitigate these risks. Keep in mind, it's not just the organization we contract to, but the individual workers they employ. The health and safety of the workers can be affected by both the work they perform and the workplace in which they perform it. Therefore, a hiring organization is expected to be responsible for the occupational health and safety of all workers performing work that is controlled by the organization. Now I'm going to let Dennis talk a little bit more about the studies we're going to review today.
Wonderful, thanks, Nicole. So as we go through this today, we get the question of, obviously we work for Avetta, we manage contractors, and we're going to say, yeah, this is something that organizations really should look at and something they should really pay attention to. Of course, we're going to say that. So what we're going to talk about today is some independent studies that have been completed really by the Campbell Institute, and then also the Professional Services Journal, I believe is the name of it, or Professional Safety Journal, I apologize, where that question was asked and really answered by a third party. So as we get started here, and really focusing initially on the Campbell Institute and their paper that was titled The Best Practices in Contractor Management. In line with that research, the Campbell Institute created a list of best practices that organizations should follow when implementing a contractor management system. As part of that Campbell Institute research, they also defined the 5 steps in the contractor life cycle. Now, while some of these steps may be less or more burdensome for some organizations based on the state of their contractor program, and also depending on what contractor it is that they're working with, these steps should all be expected to take place in the process. So the first step is going to be pre-qualification, and in the simplest terms, the host employer predetermines lagging indicator compliance protocols and metrics that its supply chain contractors must pass in order to work for the host employer. Most of the time and energy of vetting a contractor really is spent in the first step of the contractor life cycle. Some of the best practices that were suggested here would be your traditional lagging indicators, looking at safety ratings, safety stats, and so on. But really a big point here would be comparing that to industry averages. You can't do an apples to oranges comparison. It's got to be apples to apples. If you're comparing low risk to high risk, you're really not going to hit the mark that you're looking for. So it's important here that initially you are looking at those lagging indicators, but you're doing so comparing against the industry averages as well. Some of the common challenges faced here by organizations, big one here is going to be requalification, keeping the contractor information current and accessible within a single document repository. Remember that while that initial pre-qualification is super important, it isn't just a one-time event. Requalification of items that expire or need further verification should be expected. And really, any program in this regard is going to have that element of requalification. So if you're looking at it from, let's say, an administrative burden type of situation where, all right, we onboard contractors, here's how much time it takes to do that initial onboarding, that's not it. You're going to have, moving forward, any level of requalification, whether it's looking at safety stats, whether it's digging into safety manuals on a yearly basis, whether it's collecting insurance quarterly, mid-year, or just on a yearly renewal. That is something that you definitely have to keep in mind as far as time that you'll be spending on a program, whether that's an in-house solution or utilizing a third party for that.
You know, Dennis, I find that most of our clients have been good at the initial onboarding of their contractors, but the requalification aspect is where the administrative burden becomes too cumbersome and the risk in the supply chain does drop significantly. And the rigor, excuse me, not the risk. The risk goes up, the rigor goes down.
No, you're good. Well, one question I was going to ask you, Nicole, in that regard, I know that you work with a lot of our clients, potential clients in that regard. Do you see any change there in terms of maybe a program that's less sophisticated to more sophisticated in terms of that requalification in areas where organizations see benefits, I guess, either one way or the other?
Well, certainly the use of technology is going to come into play. You know, the manual process is quickly becoming outdated. We're a global organization operating on a global scale, and I think the pandemic has shed some light on that, as most of us are recognizing we're all working from home or remotely, and that's not been the case in the past. And so to be able to have a system that's unifying, you know, not only the business but the world really is an advantage.
Well, and I'll add to that a little bit as well. And I know we'll touch on technology here in a little bit, but in addition, if you have, let's say, your information stored in a filing cabinet or something of that sort, how do you know if something's gone out of compliance? You don't. And so the use of having some kind of a system with a level of sophistication that lets you know when something goes out of compliance is really important, especially in terms of a natural disaster. If you had, let's say, a fire or whatever it might have been where it destroyed your property, if everything that you were tracking information on was physical, that's all gone and you've got to start together or start back at square one. So a bunch of different areas there where that requalification can really be cumbersome in those different areas. All right, moving on now to the second step in the contractor life cycle, and that's going to be standardizing a method to evaluate the risk of the work to be performed in order to place contractors in a risk category. Best practices that were mentioned here, various levels of risk, contractor self-assessment questionnaire, assigning risk levels based on the work that is performed for the host employer, and then scalability. Common challenges here would be the host employer not aware of the span of work contractors are performing, as well as allowing prime or general contractors to vet their subcontractors. Could have conflict of interest there. Was it completed? And was the vetting up to the host employer's standards? Nicole, I'm going to ask you, a question here. I know, again, you work with a lot of our contractors or our clients, but where do you see this fall apart for organizations as far as if it's not standardized or if there isn't a level of risk rating? How does that really work against organizations?
I think several things can happen. One, you can end up duplicating efforts. Two, you can have multiple standards that are misaligned with the company's overall organization. And then back to that siloed approach, I think you can have, depending on your business units or divisions and your overall corporate structure, how does that align in terms of keeping things efficient and standardized across your supply chain can really vary greatly.
Yep, absolutely. Well said. All right, moving on to the third step of the contractor life cycle, and that takes place prior to contractors starting work. In this step, contractor workers receive site orientation or induction training. Best practices were mentioned here was a standardized video with a quiz at the end and requiring a passing grade of, let's say, 80% or whatever it is that you want to pin on that for your contractors. Also, a requirement for contractor supervision to complete relevant safety training, and then a pre-site arrival orientation through an LMS type portal. We'll touch on that portion a little bit more later, but we've heard a lot of stories, whether they're good or bad, of individuals coming on site and having spent hours upon hours to do that on-site training before they can work. Having a system in place that allows for the bulk of that to happen before a contractor come on site can be a huge time savings, but also can give you a great way to track the information based off of something that's computerized. Maybe it's a badging system as well, so you're not just looking from the company level, but you're looking at the contractor level as well. Common challenges here: significant amount of contractor worker face time to complete site orientation. Keep in mind here, though, that the amount of time spent when contractors come on site, again, in that classroom style training, this is an area where having that solution in place really does allow for that pre-site arrival training to be a huge gain for organizations. So we'll touch on that a little bit later on, but it is something that we've seen, I would say, over the last 5 years come to the forefront. It's not just, previously, I'd say 15 years ago, safety stats or insurance were really the key points when qualification was looked at. And it grew from there, looking at not just those lagging indicators, looking at more leading indicators, but now we're looking more at the individual level, not just the company level. So this sort of falls in line with that and gives organizations a little bit of a deeper dive into what it is that they might be opening themselves up for risk for with folks that are coming on site. All right, the fourth step in the contractor lifecycle involves the host employer going to the job site to conduct field oversight of the contractor's job safety performance. This step can also include contractors conducting self-assessments of their job safety performance. Best practices are mentioned here. For the host employer, it'd be daily site checks, safety talks, weekly walkthroughs, a quota system, contractor self-assessments with a quota requirement, use of phone apps, contractor incident reporting requirements, and then the tracking of corrective actions. Common challenges faced here would be tracking incident reporting findings or job site observation deficiencies to completion, and the host employer not having a standardized contractor safety infraction discipline policy. I know, Nicole, we're going to get more into that standardization portion of things here, but any thoughts behind the importance of, one, the monitoring of the job and where that really comes into play, but also the standardization of a policy when we speak about contractor management, both on the company level and on the individual level?
Well, again, I think it comes down to establishing the rigor and the resiliency in a supply chain. And not only does an external system allow for regulatory changes and compliances to be updated across the board, but also that visibility across the business units where someone from the health and safety department can have the same access and view into the supply chain as someone from procurement. You can really start to see when those questions are being answered, and then provide some analytics and business intelligence tools on top of that to be able to find efficiencies or uncover risks that might have been hidden before.
I really like something you mentioned there, Nicole, and that kind of really boils down to communication, where whatever system you put in place, it's got to be something that allows for there to be clean communication, whether it's someone from procurement, someone from safety, people working at multiple sites using the same kind of contractors. But you don't want to rely on just an email being the answer of, is this contractor compliant? Having access to the same information can be vital for an organization. All right, the final step in the contractor lifecycle is the establishment of a formal contractor post-job evaluation process. Best practices here would be the very basic collection of information on whether the work was completed safely and well. Common challenges that were mentioned here. Believe it or not, this was actually the most challenging step for Campbell Institute members within the contractor lifecycle. Most host employers didn't dedicate enough time for lessons learned before they moved to another project. And then also the lack of common form and repository. And then lastly, no resources dedicated for data analysis. So as much as we want to complete a job and just move on, it is so vital that you're critical of what was done correctly and what wasn't done correctly. How can you learn from what you've done if you don't take a step back and say, okay, what worked, what didn't work? And then those areas that didn't work, let's fix them. Let's make them, let's better those so that in the future, we're not just making the same mistake over and over. It's kind of like, what is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. That could be exactly what organizations are running into in these kind of scenarios. Nicole, I'm going to pass it back to you one last time on here. Any thoughts there behind that challenge of organizations just not taking enough time on that post-job evaluation, and where that post-job evaluation can be so important?
Well, I think the trend from good organizations to great organizations is moving towards using leading indicators versus lagging indicators, because what the post-job evaluation can give you is visibility to see who are the highest quality suppliers, just as you'd expect the highest quality out of your own internal folks. So this is a key aspect for organizations that want that competitive edge, that want to maintain their great stature and continue to add value to the world and improve the future for future generations. So I think that all comes into play with respect to looking at the leading indicator rather than the downstream, always looking at the lagging indicators.
I like it.
All right, thanks guys. So wanted to do a little bit of a poll with you folks today to make sure we haven't put you to sleep just yet. So here on the screen, as you can see, we've listed the supply chain risk maturity model, which starts at basic and works its way ending towards best in class. So based on what we've covered with you guys so far, we want to know where you think your company lies on this chart between the following phases. So initial, this is basic information management. So very basic collection of necessary documents and being a bit more on the reactive side, or often kind of putting out fires with your contractors. Managed is looking more at that operational risk. Defined, which is an automated process. This is likely where you kind of start working with a third party to help automate and centralize your process. Connected, which is data and engagement. And then, and then defined, and then optimized. So continuous improvement. So as it says there for best in class, this is the Rolls Royce of supply chain management. So having all the previous stages, but also really looking at, like Nicole mentioned, those leading indicators and having the tools you need to kind of adjust accordingly and make changes as necessary. So I'll give you guys a minute here to take a look and select what you think. Ooh, okay. So it looks like we have, I mean, a little bit obviously of an even mix there at the beginning stages, which is interesting. So just wanted you guys, I guess, to kind of keep this in mind. So as we continue to go through the presentation today, we'll kind of keep showing you how to make sure you're continuously progressing towards the right side of that chart and really working at being best in class in that contractor management.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Now let's talk about how to get you there, moving you from the left side of that pole over to the right side of that maturity model, and some best practices designed to help you get there. So first off is the use of a third-party contractor risk management solution. And why is the trend moving that way? Well, according to the Campbell Institute, the pre-qualification process is evolving from a manual and labor-intensive process to an automated and technologically savvy process. So 71% of best-in-class companies are already using a third-party pre-qualification company, and that company is using a well-documented resource and risk-adaptive vetting process. So again, this is another way to inject rigor and resilience into your supply chain in an economic manner, so that, in fact, more than likely when you outsource, it will cost you less money to improve that rigor and resilience than you can do it internally. Some of the other costs that we often think about but sometimes don't address are the threats or the cost of non-compliance. So you can have direct costs such as loss of life or limb, or you can have indirect costs such as damage to your brand reputation. You can also have stuff that's less noticeable up front, maybe the cost of procrastination, or the cost of doing nothing, or the cost of doing the bare minimum. So these are all valid reasons for researching and looking into perhaps a solution provider for outsourcing your contractor risk management. But if you do outsource, go ahead, Dennis.
No, I was just going to say, I think this slide's interesting because it mentions the threats of non-compliance, and really the cost of non-compliance, like you mentioned, is really important here, where you said the cost of doing nothing is legitimately something that organizations need to consider, where if you are doing nothing, you're ultimately just waiting for something to happen, and at that point, it's ultimately a pay now or pay later situation.
Right, that's a good point. So if you do look to outsource, then what would be the return on investment of a streamlined system? Companies should look at compliance as an opportunity to enhance business capabilities and invest to achieve those goals. Compliance spend needs to be strategically aligned to high-risk areas. One of these areas is the relationships that an organization forges with third parties, such as suppliers and contractors. While many organizations are cognizant of the value of scoring their customers and leads according to the potential revenue each presents, very few will segment third-party contractors in terms of the potential risks they represent. What's more, at most companies, contractor qualification and compliance is often still managed through disparate systems with limited visibility and flexibility, or worse, manually on paper files or Excel spreadsheets. Kind of that what Dennis mentioned about keeping things in your desktop drawer or filing cabinet and not having access to it with a technologically backed up manner. With Aveta's consultative approach, our experts guide our clients through every step of the change management process, from getting executive approval of the partnership through to the external launch and compliance of your suppliers. Whether you use Aveta or somebody else, you should choose a contractor risk management solution that encompasses this approach. When a contractor has to open their books and submit to an external auditor like Aveta, any gaps or missing elements in their processes are identified and rectified, thus giving the contractor a more robust procedure than they had prior to that audit. So in fact, as we can see here, when they're managed by a third party, suppliers and contractors can actually outperform national safety averages, and their risk rates, their safety metrics decline, and they improve their risk management. So in summary, the Campbell study found that the use of third-party contractor management systems can be considered a best practice for all companies using contractor services. So I'm going to hand it back to Dennis to talk a little bit about the assessment of safety stats.
Wonderful, thanks, Nicole. So the next item here that was listed on the Campbell Institute findings and the best practices they mentioned here was the assessment of contractor safety statistics. And in this situation, you really want to ensure that at the bare minimum, you are looking at the contractor safety statistics at a minimum to ensure that you're kind of getting that front end information. And we have mentioned here some of the US centric information, but this really goes for any organization as far as whether you're US based, Canada based, Europe, Australia. There's going to be some level of safety statistics that need to be reviewed. And that's something that every organization has to be aware of. In addition, though, you've got to make sure that you're not just looking at one period of time. You could have a company that, let's say, has really terrible stats for just 1 year, but overall, everything's gone really well for them. And that one little blip, while it might be bad, might just be a small little blip where maybe they had an employee that was causing some issues, maybe they had some internal item that they were able to take care of. Or maybe on the flip side of that, maybe all you're seeing is one little area where the organization, everything went really well. You also don't want to base their safety off of that one little area there either. So this is something that you should definitely look at, something you should definitely consider. And 100% as you're starting with that review of your contractors and looking at those best practices, those safety stats have to be key as far as what you are looking at there. Now, as we move forward here, there was a question that was raised, and that question was, what is the importance of safety professionals rating the importance or evaluating the contractor injury history during contractor pre-qualification? And hopefully it doesn't come as a surprise for most here that it's considered very important by the majority or extremely. I think, what is it, 77% of individuals feel like it is absolutely important that this is looked at. And I think everyone on this call hopefully agrees as well, where it's not the end all, but it's certainly a big part of the contractor management and review of them as well. So moving on here, in that July Professional Safety magazine that I spoke a little bit about earlier, the author cautioned on sole reliance of lagging indicators. Nicole, I know you mentioned that leading indicators also are something that should be looked at, and we'll talk more about that. But in terms of the lagging indicators, there are some concerns there, and I'll illustrate this here in a minute, but those concerns would be small numbers. So if you've got a small organization that's got a small number of contractors, it's going to look much different for them if there is an injury. Organizations under reporting, this is where you've got to be able to pull from various items as far as safety information. If you're just viewing, let's say, a self-reported safety number, what are you doing to audit that? What are you doing to back those numbers up to verify that you're getting the full story? We've also seen situations where maybe an organization hasn't had an injury per se, but they've had, let's say, fines levied against them because they're doing things that they're essentially just getting lucky. They're skating by without having the worst case scenario happen. So these are definitely areas where you've got to be careful when you're working with these contractors and when you're looking at the different areas of safety stats, ensuring that you're looking at the right things as well. Okay, so I mentioned some of the hypothetical information. This table here is really going to kind of hopefully illustrate those concerns that were mentioned previously, and that's going to be really looking at a comparison of contractor injury and illness rates. And this is just showing the difference in the incident rate based off of number of employees when everything else is the same as far as injuries go. So contractor A has 10 employees with 1 injury, and their incident rate is approximately 10. Whereas contractor B has 6 more employees with that same 1 injury, and their rate falls to 6.3. And then lastly is going to be that contractor C with 22 employees has the 1 injury, and theirs falls to 4.5. You can see just how different that injury and illness rate is just based off the fact of the number of employees that this company has. Now, this also doesn't take into account that if you're not comparing these organizations to like industry, in this case, we're looking at construction workers, but let's say that you're comparing a construction worker to somebody that's doing low risk, let's say office type work, that's going to be vastly different as well. And this construction type organization is going to look far worse in terms of their injury and illness rates as compared to those peers that you're comparing them to in terms of the office type workers. Nicole, I'm gonna pass this back to you, and just out of curiosity, anything that you've seen in terms of organizations maybe looking at their contractors and not doing a fair comparison when it comes to some of these injury and illness ratings?
Well, I think you brought it out, and one of the things that you want to look for in a solution if you're going to outsource the contractor risk management is a configurable system to allow you as the client to maintain control over who comes on site. So, you know, in a case like a VETA or a situation where you have a hypothetical or a contractor injury or illness here, like it's showing in the table, if you're able to do some research and some due diligence into that contractor and then recognize the story behind it, perhaps then, you know, if ordinarily that contractor would be flagged as non-compliant, then you can look into it and make a critical business decision based on the information you have at hand, and make sure you're not only mitigating risk, but that you're also not stopping the work that needs to happen.
Yep, absolutely. Well said. So next up on the best practices that were mentioned in this paper was an internal skill or a checklist to assign grades to your contractors during pre-qualification. Now, whether this is a A, B, C, D, E, F type grading, whether it's a percentage, 0% to 100, whether it's a red, green, yellow, whatever that might be, you've got to ensure that you've got some kind of a scale, a checklist, something in place so that it's not just an all or nothing type scenario. This will help you to be critical of those that you're working with, but this will also allow you to see how far along they are in the process. If someone's just failing because they've got maybe a poor safety rating, but they are doing everything they can to get that up, they've fixed items on site that were an issue and so on, that'll allow you to be able to get visibility into what areas they're struggling in and see if maybe they are someone that, even though they're not up to standard, maybe there's an area there where you're okay with their being on site because of the proactive measures that they've taken since those incidents have happened. So moving on here back to that July Professional Safety Magazine, the author also recommended verifying contractors by some other alternatives. And this is kind of going to be going more into, instead of those lagging indicators, more into the leading indicators. So looking at employee training and certification, looking at related work experience, liability and regulatory history, capacity to complete the work safely, pre-task and pre-job planning, monitoring, and then post-job evaluations. This is a big one here. And I know we talked earlier about the post-work evaluation from the company level, but also looking at your contractors and doing that same thing as far as saying, is this someone we want to work with again? We talked a little bit earlier about if you've got an organization that, let's say, is working at multiple sites with your organization, if you've got a contractor that caused an issue at one site, you've got to make sure that you can also communicate to other sites what sort of concerns you might have with a contractor. So keep that in mind as well in those evaluations as far as what program you're using. Are you able to communicate to those other sites if there is a problem, if you are sharing contractors as well? All right, moving on to the next best practice mentioned here. That's going to be risk rating for work to be performed by a contractor. Spoke about this a little bit, but really this comes down to that apples to oranges comparison. You want to make sure that you're looking at high risk and evaluating this high risk versus low risk, evaluating them at low risk. There's obviously different levels of concern here. If you're evaluating a low risk contractor at a high risk level, you're going to ask them for things that are not relevant. And if you're asking a high risk level for low risk items, I'm sure they can provide them for you, but you're not going to get a real true indicator of, is this somebody you should be working with based off of what you've asked them and the work that they are doing for you as well. Next on the list of best practices would be the placing a general contractor in charge of subcontractor safety and then holding them to the owner standards. Kind of compare this to the whisper game a little bit, where it's great that you vetted the general contractor. That's fantastic. That's something that you obviously want to do. But if you're holding them accountable to, let's say, vet out their subcontractors or folks that they're bringing on site, you've got to ensure that they're vetting them to the level that you want to vet them at. And so that open communication is super important, something that you've got to make sure you're doing. But also, as we talk about the administrative burden, if you're buried at your desk all day in paperwork trying to figure out who's compliant and who isn't, you can't go down and actually work on the site and know what folks are doing what they should be. And so when we talk through some of these different areas as far as visibility, this is a big key point here as well, as far as being able to see what's happening on site. If you're buried in paperwork at your desk, you're not going to be able to see that. And then
You know, Dennis, this is one of the questions. This is one of the questions that we have often when we start these conversations with potential clients, is opening this Pandora's box of risk, and how far down the hierarchy does your rigor go? You know, to what end do you check and verify the safety, the security, the certifications or the trainings on your supply chain?
No, I think that's a fantastic point, and it really comes down to being critical and ensuring that those that you're working with, you mentioned it right there, Nicole, you know, how far down are you going? How far do you need to go? And ultimately, are you truly questioning and saying, my goodness, you know, it hasn't happened yet, but it could happen. And just because this company here, maybe they said that they've been given the okay, are you certain that there's somebody that you want on site, and have they been held to the standards that you've asked for as well? No, really good point. Second to last one here would be the verification of contractor certifications, permits, and then the on-site safety orientations. I know we've spoken a lot about vetting organizations themselves, but this is digging more into the individuals, where you want to ensure that you've got folks on site that you can trust, that have been certified to the level that you would like. But also this sort of brings in other aspects as well. If we're looking at, you want to ensure that badge access, let's say, and you can sort of parlay that into, one, do you want the folks coming on site? But two, are there certain parts of the organization or the site itself where you don't want that individual to be? Even furthermore, if there is some sort of accident, you've got to know where folks are. One, you got to make sure that you know who you got to be accountable for, but two, if there was an accident in one certain part of the building, if you could know who was in that portion of the building and then know who you need to account for, that's helpful as well. So there's a lot that kind of encompasses that there. But as an organization, if that is something that, let's say, could be a potential concern, definitely would encourage you to look further into ways to manage that as well, which of course third parties can do for you. And then lastly would be the periodic scheduled assessments during a contract term. If you're buried in paperwork, good luck here. This is something where you've really got to schedule time with your contractors to ensure that this is something that you truly are doing and you're making time for. It goes back to what we talked about earlier around the administrative burden and the amount of paperwork involved with that if you don't have a sophisticated system in place to do so. Nicole, anything you might add there in terms of maybe folks that you've worked with in the past and even currently around some of that administrative burden and scheduling those assessments, and maybe the time that organizations don't have if they're not making time for it as well?
Well, I think this point really resonates in terms of how do you build ongoing resilience in your supply chain? You know, what are the factors in play for you to be able to do that efficiently, economically, you know, regularly scheduled versus a snapshot or a kind of just a still picture of where you are at any given point, or a spot check, if you will. So,
Yep.
you know, I think those are some of the challenges that we're going to talk about here in our remaining few minutes of the webinar. You know, these here, they speak for themselves, but when you think about your own solution or about engaging a third party, how do you handle these potential issues? How do you achieve having a centralized and globally visible access to your supply chain? You know, what kind of integration from those lagging metrics and statistics do you have, and what can you do with that data once you have it? Is it just sit there lost on Excel, or can you take that data and put some business intelligence tools to work and really look at either an executive level report or a quarterly business review and make sure that you are, once you've uncovered those hidden risks or inefficiencies, what can you do to be able to improve them? So one way to do it is, as Forbes puts it, we need to digitize or die. You know, we mentioned earlier that if there's a natural disaster and you don't have access to the cloud, you might lose all of your documentation and data if it's stored on a local hard drive or if it's stored in a local, you know, filing cabinet. Another area, another superpower listed by Forbes is mobile technology. And this is more important than ever. As we all experienced in March and April, we started coming home from our offices and grabbing our laptops and working remotely. And if you don't have the ability to get, you know, visibility and rigor and resilience into your supply chain on a mobile device, then you're really restricted to a desktop or to, you know, to a large cumbersome piece of technology that might not facilitate you being able to go into the field or being able to work remotely. So that's an area that can be solved by continuously advancing with technology like there is today. Then there's IoT, the Internet of Things, which for those of you who don't know, and I didn't know about it before working for Avetta, but this is the network of physical objects, the things, and they're all embedded with sensors and software, and there's other technologies that communicate with that, and that's the purpose, to connect and exchange data with devices and systems. And so with this infrastructure, you really can get hands-on approach to asset management or to geofencing at site locations like a telecom tower. So there's all these ways that the digitization of the world has brought huge advances and can affect your supply chain in an enormous way. And lastly, with AI, you know, I think this is a buzzword and a topic, and people talk about how robots can either save the world or cause its demise. But you know, on the positive side of AI, letting the technology predict and finding a way to use predictive analytics and leading indicators to prevent fires and be proactive and strategic in our roles, especially in health and safety. I mean, at the end of the day, we want folks to go home safely. So rather than you know, the reactive approach to what happens after an accident or an incident, finding ways of prevention and making sure that we are improving our metrics, you know, both in-house internally in our own employees and companies, but also externally on those contractors as well. The idea too is that these areas can help you as an organization stay ahead of the competition and focus on the upstream source of the problems rather than the downstream symptoms, like we mentioned. So in full disclosure, let's show you an example of technology. This is the Avetta platform. And you know, here's some reasons why you should digitize. And you can choose Avetta or you can choose someone else, as long as you're taking a look at what the best fit for your business needs are. So with a technology like Avetta's, you have enhanced visibility. you can configure our solution to meet your needs based on your industry. And we are a very consultative approach. We love to share best practices and co-innovate with our clients. And so not only do we have experience across multiple different industries, but then we like to take that experience and really develop new products or improve our own products, existing products, to respond to the developing needs and evolving needs of our clients. Another area is to streamline your contract evaluation process. Again, making the suppliers enter the info, making it the suppliers responsibility to input that data, to supply that information, and then the technology in Avetta can refer back and make sure they're flagging or alerting you as the client to what needs to be updated, and the supplier also always knows their status in the system, so it's not ambiguous whether or not they're compliant or non-compliant, or it's Monday morning, they need to show up on a job site. Are they allowed access when they get there? No, all that information is given up front, and the planning and execution of their day-to-day jobs can take place. And finally, to measure, track, and analyze in real time to make critical business decisions with the appropriate data. That's a big advantage to using technology in general, and one of the areas that is delivered is through the platform like Avetta. So Avetta has a mobile-friendly solution. As I mentioned, that's one of the key areas that Forbes mentioned, and it unifies your processes across all lines of business, both in the office and in the field. So on the smartphone there, you see an example of our worker management portal, which can give security access. It can show trainings and certifications. It can give badging and induction trainings, just all kinds of access. You can do time and attendance, drug and alcohol testing, a lot of things available with the worker management aspect of our portal. On the desktop there, you see an analytics report, which delivers customized dashboards and reports to your inbox at a frequency that you determine ahead of time. So this is great for, as I mentioned, QBR, or if you want to see before you go into an executive level meeting the health or status of your supply chain and what can you do to benchmark. And this works a lot for our clients in terms of supplier diversity and where are we going versus where are we today. And then on the tablet there, you can see the health of your supply chain at a glance with the compliance data accessible at the click of a button. With the Avetta solution, you're provided with an end-to-end suite of tools designed to meet your unique needs. It starts with the onboarding and engagement process of the supplier pre-qualification. We collect all of the information directly with the supplier, and our registration and supplier support teams work constantly with those suppliers in order to collect the most recent and accurate data. Our insurance team then reviews and monitors the certificates of insurance to ensure that our clients are the named insured and that the policies hold the appropriate levels of limits. For our on-site high-risk contractors, there's the supplier assessment, which is a desktop safety manual audit designed to review and identify any gaps or missing areas in that safety manual. Once that gap or missing element is identified, then our auditors work in tandem with your contractors to help them fill those gaps. So our auditors can supply them with some templates. They can give them access to resources. We can't actually build their safety manual for them because we are the auditor, but we can help in terms of subject matter expertise and give them advice and counsel. I already mentioned our worker management product, so that collects everything on the individual granular level that all the other three areas on the left side of that column collect on the company scale. And our performance reviews are a critical piece that our clients have asked us to incorporate. So this talks about more of the qualitative approach of using good or great contractors. Again, this is a lot along the lines of the post-work job evaluation that you can do on your contractors that's visible only to you. It's private to your organization and your list of contractors. And it allows you to determine whether a contractor has shown up to work on site, if they've respected budget, if they've respected a clean work site and cleaned up after themselves. So it really gives you a lot more qualitative approach in addition to the binary results that you would get from a compliance audit. And then lastly, the analytics and reporting tool helps you understand the data that we've collected in a tangible way and in a way to give you what you need to do to make critical business decisions.
Awesome, thanks guys. So we're gonna go into some time for Q&A here, so feel free to submit any questions that you have. But first, really wanted to thank you again for joining us today. We're really passionate about this industry and we love helping to keep people safe. As you can see here, you can feel free to download the full Campbell's Institute research report at the link that's listed on the screen. And additionally, for any more information on Avetta, please feel free to contact me directly. My information will be on the next slide here. I'm happy to help.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. It's Marcel Vanderweer, editor of OHS Canada, and we do have a few questions following this webinar. And so I'll allow our panelists to determine who answers each of them. But the first question is, how do you overcome the issue of contractors not wanting to participate in a program or submit data?
I'm going to go ahead and I'll take that one here. And really, this is a question that we do see from time to time when it's concern around, look, if we do put a program in place, are we going to lose some of the contractors we work with for, let's say, 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And the answer is yes, that could happen. But as an organization, are you willing to put the individuals that you're working with at risk, or the other companies that you're working with at risk, just based off of maybe a personal relationship or a long-standing professional relationship that you might have with an organization? So really, it comes down to, you've got to be willing to line in the sand and say, this is exactly what it is that we're requiring. This is why. And one thing that we found, and I hate to put Nicole on the spot here, but I'd be curious to know kind of her thoughts around this. But generally, the contractors that aren't willing to supply information are those that have something to hide. Ultimately, you're not going to say, I'm not willing to provide this information unless you have a reason to not want to show that information. And in a lot of cases, when that has come up and a company said, you know what, we just don't want to supply that information for you, it's because there is something to hide. And again, Nicole, I hate to put you on the spot there, but I know that's something that I've seen, and I'm sure that's something that you've seen as well.
Well, it's that, and it's also that we work with a lot of smaller mom and pop, sole proprietors, suppliers and contractors. In fact, probably 40% of our 100,000 contractors in our network have 25 or fewer employees themselves. And so if you can imagine how strained we all are recently, we're all wearing multiple hats in our own organizations. These contractors may not have the resources to be able to get compliant. And so the access to our subject matter experts and to our auditors really can help them get over that hump of saying, we don't have a dedicated health and safety professional on staff. And so we've been getting by, we've been working, we are trained and ready, but we don't have the formal documents to prove it. And so sometimes that can be just a service that they need. Or on the other aspect, yeah, there will be folks who aren't willing to get compliant. And do our clients really want to continue a relationship with contractors like that?
Well, and maybe just to add a little bit more to that as well, you've also got to be consistent in your approach and what you're asking from your contractors. Contractors do talk. And if you're allowing folks to come on site that aren't providing the requested information, that aren't compliant, and you're not holding them accountable, then you're losing all the teeth to your program at that point. So it's vitally important that you're consistent with that and that you hold the contractors accountable as well.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Our second question is, we have our own program. What are the advantages of using a company like yours?
I'll take that one, Marcel. So I think some of the advantages can be seen as, why do people outsource in general? So Avetta, this is what we do all day, every day. We vet and pre-qualify and evaluate third-party contractors for our clients. And our system allows us to configure the platform to respond to our clients' needs. And then the automation and the technology behind the platform allows us to execute that at a grand scale. So really, we're able to do it for our clients for less money than it can be done in-house, and with improved, rigor and resilience. I keep using those terms because they're so relevant to the conversation today, and talking about how can we have those standardizations and apply those requirements and enforce it on a scale in the field if we don't have that data at hand. And so that's one of the ways that Avetta can give you an advantage to your internal program and probably be able to do it with some higher efficiencies as well.
Yeah, one thing I'm going to add to that really quickly is you want to make sure that you're utilizing something that has already gone through it. And so in this case, we've got over 500 clients. We've worked with tons and tons in terms of knowing what works, what doesn't work. And when we work with organizations, we share those best practices as well. And so the old saying of, have those do the job that they're good at, that's where you might want to look at something like this. It's great. There's companies that have done their own program and it's worked flawlessly, but there's a lot of others that have tried to kind of recreate the wheel, and they come back to us or like organizations and say, look, we've done okay, but for some reason we're just not getting it across the line. What do you do and how do you do it? Those lessons learned are vitally important and something that we've been able to leverage for a lot of organizations.
Great. A question from our audience is, who does the auditing? Employees who have their CRSP designation?
Yes, we have over 60 health and safety professionals scattered around the globe. Here in Canada, they have multiple designations. Some of them are CRSP. We have core and C-core auditors on staff as well. So depending on the area that the audit requires or the industry, we have an auditor who has those appropriate designations.
Great. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Here's another from the audience. Regarding the safety statistics, is this something that you ask the contractor directly for, or can you go to your provincial or state safety organization?
Yes, we have direct links to, in the United States, we have direct links with OSHA and MSHA. So we collect what is the federal governing body has on the industry statistics. Here in Canada, as we are self-reported, we will go to those bodies, CANOSH and the local workers' comp boards as well, to make sure that we're getting clearance letters and actual statistics depending on the industry to validate and verify what the contractors are submitting themselves. And that's where that trust but verify aspect comes in, is not only do we ask the contractors to self-report, but then our experts are going back in and verifying and validating that information.
Great. Another question, maybe we can squeak one more in after this, but did the study detail the difference between pre-qualification and contractor management? Is there a way to efficiently pre-qualify several companies bidding on work without a large commitment of resources, time, and money?
I'll take that one, and I think that it really depends on how what the scope is that you're collecting information on. If you're really trying to dig into, let's say, a lot of organizations and doing that pre-qualification, pre-job, and it's a lot of information that you're gathering, there will be time spent. There's no question about it, and that's just kind of the reality of it. That really comes down to you as an organization. How committed are you to ensuring that these are folks you want to work with? But then, do you want to do that rigor all the way up front before you've awarded a job? Do you want to do it after? We've seen some situations where organizations will essentially bid and they'll take the lowest bid possible, and then they, after the fact, do the pre-qualification. That's kind of up to you. That depends on what it is that you want to do, but ultimately that's got to be something that as an organization you're committed to collecting that information, whether it's before or after the fact. As far as the study goes, I don't know that it segmented the two themselves, but essentially what it did find was that it was a suggestion that they found that organizations that are utilizing a third-party contractor management solution, really there are some massive gains that they've seen, and the numbers are huge. And I know that Stephanie, you mentioned that we have those links inside of the presentation itself, but very helpful, and some great information is there as well to walk you through sort of what was found there.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. It appears that that's all the time we have for questions, but obviously Stephanie's email is on screen if you'd like to contact her with follow-up. I'd like to close by once again thanking everyone for joining us today. And for the latest news and information on Canadian workplace health and safety, visit ohscanada.com. Have a great day, everyone.